Judge Peterson stifled a yawn as Malik Johnson, a black teen, approached during Youth Law Day. Expecting a naive mock trial, Peterson openly scoffed at the serious case files detailing NYPD profiling near Malik's school. He had no idea this presentation held explosive power, backed by formidable allies ready for a fight. What happens when arrogance meets unexpected truth? Let us know your location below. If youth fighting for justice inspires you, hit like, subscribe for the stunning ACLU reveal next time. Malik Johnson took a steadying breath, ignoring the judge's visible skepticism and the slight tremor in his own hands. He squared his shoulders and began his presentation, his voice gaining confidence as he delved into the material he knew so intimately, Your Honor, based on 6 months of documented observation community surveys filed under procedural guidance and publicly available stop data requested through FOIL pertaining to the blocks immediately surrounding Liberty High School in the Bronx. My research indicates a statistically significant disparity in law enforcement interactions initiated by officers from the 48th Precinct against Black and Latino students compared to their white and Asian peers. He clicked to the first slide showing stark bar graphs. Over 60% of documented non-criminal investigatory stops involved Black or Latino youths who constitute only 40% of the school's demographic. He detailed specific, anonymized incidents. Student A stopped 3 times in 1 week, asked for identification, patted down with no reasonable suspicion, cited student B forced to empty her backpack onto a public sidewalk while officers searched her belongings, citing only that she looked nervous. Student C questioned aggressively about gang affiliation simply for wearing a hooded sweatshirt on a cool morning. These aren't isolated incidents, Your Honor. They form a pattern, a climate of fear and suspicion that interferes with our education, our sense of safety, and our fundamental rights. He cited the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection, referencing the principles established in Terryville, Ohio, but questioning their application in these blanket stops, which often lacked individualized suspicion. He spoke clearly, methodically, presenting his findings with a seriousness that seemed utterly lost on Judge Peterson. The judge leaned back in his large leather chair, making little effort to hide his boredom. He tapped his pen rhythmically on the bench, examined his fingernails, exchanged a brief eye roll with his weary-looking clerk. Occasionally he interjected, with comments laced with condescension, "Very dramatic, Mr. Johnson. Are you sure these students weren't simply loitering? Perhaps their nervous appearance was suspicious. You have to understand officers have a difficult job out there." He treated Malik's carefully compiled data as if it were material for a school play. Dismissing the lived experiences behind the numbers, Malik pressed on, presenting quotes from anonymous student surveys detailing feelings of being constantly watched, harassed, profiled. How these interactions made them anxious about walking to school, dread encounters with police, how it impacted their ability to focus on learning. Judge Peterson sighed loudly, shifting in his seat. He glanced ostentatiously at the clock on the courtroom wall. Finally, he held up a hand, cutting Malik off abruptly. "All right, Mr. Johnson, that's quite enough theatrics," he said, his voice dripping with patronizing amusement. "This is truly compelling fiction. I'll grant you that. You have a flair for the dramatic. Perhaps you should consider theater instead of law." He chuckled lightly, a dry, dismissive sound. "Now, just for amusement, tell the court who exactly is backing this impressive little fantasy lawsuit of yours, your high school debate club coach. Perhaps the drama teacher." His smirk widened, expecting Malik to flush with embarrassment or stammer an awkward reply. Instead, Malik stood taller, meeting the judge's mocking gaze directly. His nervousness seemed to evaporate, replaced by a quiet, resolute dignity. "Actually, Your Honor," he stated, his voice perfectly calm, perfectly clear, "this research forms the basis of a pending legal action. My co-counsel is Ms. Sarah Chen from the American Civil Liberties Union." As the last words left Malik's lips, a figure rose smoothly from the back row where observers and teachers sat. Sarah Chen, impeccably dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, her expression professional, poised, exuded an air of quiet confidence. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible, nod towards the bench. The effect on Judge Peterson was instantaneous. The condescending smirk froze, then slid off his face as if wiped clean. His eyes widened slightly, his jaw going slack. He swiveled his head sharply towards Sarah Chen, then back. Towards Malik, then back to Chen. His face, which had been ruddy with impatience, now seemed to drain of color, leaving behind a pale, shocked mask. The full weight of Malik's statement, the name American Civil Liberties Union, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't dealing with an overzealous teenager playing lawyer. He was facing a meticulously prepared case, potentially a class action lawsuit, backed by one of the most formidable civil rights organizations in the country. Presented by a student he had just publicly ridiculed and dismissed based on lazy, prejudiced assumptions. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt heavy, charged with the judge's dawning horror and the stark, undeniable reality of his colossal blunder. He sat perfectly still, momentarily speechless, utterly blindsided by the truth he had so arrogantly refused to see. Judge Arthur Peterson sat momentarily paralyzed. The echo of Malik Johnson's words, American Civil Liberties Union, reverberating in the suddenly silent courtroom. The judge's carefully constructed facade of bored indifference had shattered, revealing the flustered, irritable man beneath. He blinked rapidly, his gaze flicking between the composed figure of Sarah Chen, now standing fully in the aisle, and the resolute 17-year-old Malik still standing at the podium. He struggled visibly to regain control, clearing his throat, shuffling papers on the bench, attempting to project an authority that felt suddenly hollow. His face flushed a mottled red, a mixture of profound embarrassment at being so publicly mistaken and rising anger at being blindsided in his own courtroom during a program he likely viewed as a tedious obligation. He finally found his voice, though it lacked its earlier dismissive confidence. Miss Chen, he stammered slightly, addressing the ACLU lawyer. This program has specific parameters. It is an educational exercise for students. Your organization, while noted, has no official standing or right to intervene in these proceedings. This is highly irregular and frankly inappropriate. Sarah Chen remained. Calm her posture, erect her gaze, direct and professional. Your Honor, we certainly respect the educational goals of Youth Law Day, she replied, her tone even and respectful yet firm. However, the research meticulously compiled by Mr. Johnson detailing patterns of discriminatory stops and data collection near Liberty High School is substantive and forms the direct basis of a significant class action lawsuit which the ACLU intends to file formally against the NYPD and the City of New York in the coming weeks. We believed utilizing this existing public forum to provide preliminary notice of the claims before litigation commences, aligned with principles of transparency. Her statement, delivered without apology or hesitation, landed like another blow, confirming this was not a bluff, not a hypothetical exercise. The courtroom buzzed. A student event suddenly transformed into real-world legal drama. You could feel the tension spike. It's moments like these that show how quickly things can change, right? Let us know where you are watching from comment number 1. If you think Judge Peterson's initial reaction was pure bias, and if stories about challenging the system matter to you, please hit like and subscribe for what happens next. Judge Peterson, visibly flustered, slammed his hand down on the bench, though it lacked the authoritative crack of his gavel. This is outrageous, he sputtered, no longer attempting to hide his agitation. This program is not a platform for ambush, litigation, or political stunts by the ACLU. This session is over. This Youth Law Day session is adjourned immediately. He rose abruptly, his black robe swirling around him clearly, intending to end the public spectacle before it spiraled further. But as students, teachers, and observers began shifting uncertainly, murmuring amongst themselves, Peterson fixed his glare first on Malik, then on Sarah Chen. Mr. Johnson, Ms. Chen, my chambers, now. His voice was sharp, tight with fury, and perhaps a dawning sense of panic. He didn't wait for a response, turning sharply and striding through the heavy door behind the bench, leaving Malik and Sarah Chen standing amidst the low roar of confused chatter. They exchanged a brief, significant look. Sarah gave Malik a subtle, reassuring nod. before they turned to follow the judge into the private, potentially explosive confrontation awaiting them behind closed doors. Summoned behind those closed doors away from public eyes, what explosive confrontation awaited Malik and Sarah Chen in Judge Peterson's chambers, and would the judge's potent mix of anger, embarrassment, and wounded pride lead to dire threats, or perhaps the first grudging acknowledgement that the teenager he'd so readily dismissed held a case demanding serious attention? Judge Arthur Peterson's chambers felt both imposing and claustrophobic. Law books lined the walls floor to ceiling, heavy mahogany furniture dominated the space-framed degrees, and commendations spoke of a long career. But the judge himself radiated none of the calm authority suggested by the decor. He paced behind his massive desk like a caged animal, his face still flushed with anger and embarrassment, his judicial robe slightly askew. Malik Johnson and Sarah Chen stood before the desk, waiting, bracing themselves for the inevitable tirade Peterson rounded on Malik. First, his voice sharp-laced with fury. "How dare you?" he snapped, pointing a finger at the teenager. "You turn my courtroom, this educational program meant to inspire respect for the law, into some kind of political stunt, some kind of ambush. Do you have any idea the blatant disrespect you have shown this court boy? This kind of stunt, this arrogance, it could follow you, ruin your college applications, destroy any chance you think you might have." He spat the words out, his prejudice barely veiled, mixing condescension with overt threats about Malik's future. Then he whirled on Sarah Chen. "And you, Ms. Chen, the ACLU should be ashamed, using a child manipulating a teenager to push your radical agenda, abusing a program designed for goodwill and outreach. This is unethical grandstanding, pure and simple. You ambushed me. You ambushed this court." Sarah Chen remained outwardly calm, though Malik could see the slight tightening. Around her eyes she waited until Peterson paused for breath before responding. "Your Honor, with all due respect," she began, her voice steady, professional, "we believe Mr. Johnson has shown remarkable initiative and courage, not disrespect. His research, conducted diligently over many months, highlights significant constitutional concerns regarding NYPD practices near his school. As for the ACLU, our mandate is to defend civil liberties wherever they are threatened, including the rights of young people. We provided Mr. Johnson with legal guidance, but the impetus and the core findings are his own. We chose this venue believing wrongly, perhaps, that presenting these serious concerns initially in an educational context might foster dialogue. Before formal litigation, she gestured towards the thick binders they had carried in, Your Honor, perhaps reviewing Mr. Johnson's actual findings, the data, the anonymized accounts, the preliminary legal analysis would be more productive than accusations of manipulation. She placed the binders firmly on the edge of Peterson's desk. The heavy thud seemed to momentarily break the judge's momentum. He glanced down at the binders, his eyes narrowing. He looked back at Malik, who found his voice overcoming the lump of fear in his throat. "It isn't just numbers, Judge Peterson. It's real, it's happening every day. My friend got thrown against a wall last month just for asking why he was stopped. Another girl I know is scared to walk home alone after dark because she gets harassed. I got stopped twice last week, just walking from the subway. They treat us like we are already guilty just for being there. We just want it to stop. We just want to be treated fairly." Malik's words, simple, direct spoken, with quiet conviction, seemed to pierce Peterson's anger momentarily. The judge stared at him, perhaps seeing for the first time not just an insolent teenager, but a young man articulating a genuine, deeply felt grievance. He looked back at the evidence. Binders saw the charts, the pages of text, the reality of the situation, the fact that this wasn't a school project but a looming major lawsuit backed by the ACLU with potentially explosive data began to sink in. His anger didn't dissipate, but it shifted, transforming into something colder, more calculating. He recognized the threat this represented, not just to the NYPD or the city, but potentially to the precarious balance of power. He navigated perhaps even to his own connections or reputation. Malik saw the shift in the judge's eyes, the brief flicker of calculation replacing the overt fury. Peterson abruptly waved a dismissive hand. "Get out," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its earlier heat. "Both of you, this meeting is over. I have nothing further to discuss regarding this blatant misuse of a community outreach program. But as they turned to leave, he added a final, chilling warning. Understand this, Ms. Chen, Mr. Johnson. You are poking a hornet's nest. You are taking on forces you do not. Comprehend this city, this department. They protect their own, there will be consequences. Consider yourselves warned. They exited the chambers, the heavy door closing behind them, shutting off the judge's cold stare. As they walked down the relatively quiet private corridor leading away from the judge's suite, Malik hesitated. He heard Peterson's voice raised now, no longer addressing them, but clearly speaking into a phone urgently. Frank Arthur, Peterson. Listen, we have a serious problem brewing. Down here at the Bronx courthouse. Yeah, the Youth Day thing, that student presentation turned into a damn ambush. ACLU, some smart-mouthed kid from Liberty High. Looks like real trouble targeting the 4-8 precinct, stops near the school. Got binders. Full of data. They are planning a class action. We need to get ahead of this now, bury it before it starts. Malik exchanged a look with Sarah Chen. Her expression confirmed what he suspected. Peterson wasn't just angry, he was already mobilizing powerful city figures, likely the police commissioner or the head of the city's law department. His warning wasn't an idle threat, it was a promise. The institutional counterattack had already begun before they even left the courthouse grounds. The hornets. A nest had been poked, and the hornets were swarming. Stepping out of Judge Peterson's chambers into the relative anonymity of the courthouse corridor, Malik Johnson's heart was still pounding. The judge's barely concealed fury and the overheard fragment of the phone call confirmed their fears. Peterson wasn't just dismissing the case. He was actively mobilizing powerful forces against them. Sarah Chen placed a steadying hand on Malik's shoulder. Her expression was grim but resolute. Okay, Malik, she said quietly. That went about as badly. As expected, but it also tells us something important. They are scared. Your research, your evidence, it threatens them. That's why Peterson reacted that way. His call confirms they are taking this seriously, which means we have to be prepared for significant pushback. They walked quickly out of the building, discussing strategy in hushed tones. Sarah emphasized the need to formally file the lawsuit immediately to gain legal protections and initiate the discovery process. She also praised Malik's courage both in his presentation and in the judge's chambers. You held your own remarkably well, Malik. Don't let his anger intimidate you. You have the facts and you have the ACLU behind you. But her next words were a sobering warning. This will get difficult, Malik. They will come after you. They will try to discredit you, intimidate you, maybe even try to scare your family. Be vigilant, document everything. Report anything suspicious immediately to me, no matter how small it seems. Her warning proved prophetic. Within hours, news of the confrontation at the Youth Law Day event and the impending ACLU lawsuit against the 48th Precinct's stop and search practices near Liberty High ricocheted through the corridors of Power at One Police Plaza. The city's law department and city hall phones buzzed with urgent calls. Meetings were hastily convened. Strategies for containment and counterattack were undoubtedly being formulated. Lieutenant Harrison, at the 48th Precinct, likely received a blistering call from his superiors, demanding an explanation, possibly ordering him to handle the situation. The backlash against Malik began subtly at first, then escalated. The following day at Liberty High, Malik was summoned to the principal's office. Mr. Davies, a man usually focused on budgets and standardized tests, adopted an air of paternal concern. Malik, he began, leaning back in his chair. I heard about your presentation at the courthouse. Very ambitious work. However, some concerns have been raised. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We want all our students to succeed. Malik to focus on academics, get into good colleges, pursuing controversial activities, taking on powerful institutions. It can create distractions, sometimes unintended consequences. It's important to think about the bigger picture, your future. Perhaps focusing your energy on your studies might be more beneficial right now. The message beneath the faux concern was clear. Drop it. Or else some teachers, previously friendly, became suddenly distant, grading his assignments more harshly, questioning his participation in class. It felt like invisible walls were closing in. Then the online harassment started, anonymous accounts on social media platforms began targeting Malik, posting comments filled with racist slurs, calling him a troublemaker, a liar, a pawn manipulated by radical lawyers. They spread rumors suggesting he was affiliated with local gangs, twisting innocent. Photos found online into something menacing. The digital attacks were relentless, designed to isolate him, instill fear, erode his confidence. But the most direct and terrifying retaliation came from Lieutenant Harrison and his unit, the marked NYPD. Cruiser assigned to Harrison or his known subordinates became an unnerving fixture near Malik's apartment building in the mornings and along his route home from school. At first, they just watched, letting their presence be known. Then came the stops walking home one afternoon. Malik was abruptly stopped by Harrison himself, flanked by another officer. "What's your hurry, Johnson?" Harrison asked, his voice falsely. "Pleasant. Just heading home," Sir Malik replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Fit the description," Harrison said vaguely, looking him up and down. "We are looking for someone involved in a robbery nearby. Empty your pockets. Let's see some ID." Malik complied, his hands shaking slightly as Harrison conducted a slow, deliberate search, finding nothing. Of course, afterwards, Harrison stared hard at him. "You be careful now, Malik wouldn't want you getting into any trouble. This neighborhood can be dangerous." The veiled threat hung heavy in the air. Similar stops followed over. The next few days, each time the pretext was different. You were walking too fast. You looked suspicious. You matched a different description. Sometimes they held him for 10-15 minutes, asking pointless questions, running his name through the system, finding nothing. Sometimes they'd just cruise slowly beside him as he walked, their eyes fixed on him, a silent, omnipresent intimidation. One afternoon, Officer Shaw, the younger, more volatile officer, often partnered with Harrison, stopped. Him checked his backpack meticulously, dumping his schoolbooks onto the sidewalk, then let him go, offering a sneering, "Have a nice day, future lawyer." It's chilling to see direct harassment start like that, isn't it? Let us know where you're joining. From Tell Us comment number 1. If you think this police intimidation is unacceptable, and if you believe Malik's fight deserves support, please hit like and subscribe to follow his dangerous journey. The message was clear. We are watching you, we can touch you, we can make your life miserable. Malik felt a constant knot of anxiety. He started varying his routes home, looking over his shoulder, avoiding eye contact. But alongside the fear, a cold anger grew. He meticulously documented every stop, every interaction, noting times, locations, officer names, badge numbers when possible, relaying everything immediately to Sarah Chen. This harassment, intended to break him, was instead forging his resolve and providing first-hand evidence for the very lawsuit they were trying to suppress, with the NYPD resorting to direct intimidation against a 17-year-old student. How would Malik and the ACLU officially strike back in the legal arena? And as the lawsuit challenging these racist practices is formally filed, what powerful institutional machinery will the city and the police department deploy to crush this challenge before it gains any more ground or reveals even more uncomfortable truths? The campaign of police harassment against Malik Johnson, while terrifying, also served as fuel. The blatant intimidation provided stark first-hand evidence, bolstering the case he and Sarah Chen were building, with Malik's meticulously documented logs of the recent stops added to the existing research and anonymized accounts. The American Civil Liberties Union formally filed a class action lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The complaint named 17-year-old Malik Johnson as the lead plaintiff, representing a class of all Black and Latino students subjected to unlawful, suspicionless stop searches and data collection by officers from the NYPD's 48th Precinct in the vicinity of Liberty High School over the preceding 2 years. It named Lieutenant Marcus Harrison, Officer Dean Shaw, Officer Frank Miller, implicated in some of the data, though not present at the initial Youth Law Day, the 48th Precinct Command, the New York City Police Department, and the City of New York itself as defendants. The lawsuit alleged systematic violations of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures and the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law, seeking not only monetary damages, but crucially injunctive relief, mandating specific policy changes, cessation of the discriminatory practices, and independent oversight. The filing immediately ignited a media firestorm. The ACLU held a press conference outside the courthouse. Sarah Chen, flanked by supporting attorneys and community leaders, laid out the core allegations, presenting charts, summarizing Malik's statistical findings, and reading redacted excerpts. From student accounts, Malik stood beside her, looking younger than his 17 years, but speaking with quiet force. "I started this research because my friends and I were tired of being treated like criminals just for walking to school," he told the assembled reporters. "We deserve to feel safe in our own neighborhood. We deserve the same rights as everyone else. This lawsuit isn't just about me. It's about ensuring every student can learn without fear." The reaction from the city and the NYPD was swift, predictable, and aggressive. The mayor's office issued a statement expressing full confidence in the NYPD and decrying the lawsuit as divisive and meritless. The NYPD's Deputy Commissioner for Public Information held a separate press conference, staunchly defending the actions of the 48th Precinct officers, citing the need for proactive policing in a challenging environment and dismissing Malik's data as amateurish, flawed, and statistically insignificant. The city's Corporation Council, the powerful law department representing New York in legal matters, assigned a team of its most experienced litigators, vowing to vigorously defend the city and its officers. They immediately went on the offensive, attacking Malik personally. In their public statements and initial court filings, they portrayed him as a disgruntled teenager with an anti-police agenda manipulated by the ACLU for fundraising and political purposes. They hinted at digging into his school disciplinary records, searching for anything to undermine his credibility. The police union predictably echoed these attacks, with its president issuing inflammatory statements calling the lawsuit an insult to dedicated officers. The pressure on Malik intensified significantly at school. The principal, Mr. Davies, called him in again this time. His tone was less concerned advisor, more stern disciplinarian. "Malik, your involvement in this lawsuit is becoming a serious disruption to the school environment," he stated flatly. "I've received complaints other students feel uncomfortable. There are concerns about safety, given the tensions with police. I strongly suggest you reconsider your participation. It's affecting your focus, your reputation, and potentially your college prospects." The veiled threats were becoming less veiled. Malik felt increasingly isolated. Some former friends now avoided him, perhaps fearing association or pressured by families connected to law enforcement. Behind the scenes, however, a more insidious form of institutional mobilization was occurring. While Judge Arthur Peterson had been forced to distance himself publicly from the matter after the chamber's confrontation, his influence lingered. He still held considerable sway within the courthouse hierarchy built up over years on the bench. Through discreet phone calls, leveraging old alliances, and perhaps calling in favors, he subtly worked behind the scenes concerning the crucial assignment of the newly filed ACLU case. The federal court system typically used a random wheel or computer algorithm for case assignments designed to ensure impartiality, but Peterson knew the system, its loopholes, its personnel. He likely spoke to the clerk of court or key administrative staff, expressing strong opinions about which judges possess the necessary experience or temperament for such a complex, sensitive case involving the NYPD. His goal was clear: to steer the lawsuit away from potentially sympathetic judges and towards one known for deference to authority and skepticism. Towards civil rights claims, Sarah Chen received the official notification of judicial assignment via the electronic court filing system. She stared at the name on the screen, her heart sinking. Judge Gloria Callahan. Judge Callahan was a Reagan appointee with a long-established reputation. She was known for her sharp intellect, but also for her consistently conservative rulings, particularly in cases challenging law enforcement or governmental authority. She had a documented history of dismissing civil rights cases on technicalities, granting qualified immunity readily and displaying open impatience often bordering on hostility towards plaintiffs like Malik and organizations. Like the ACLU, getting assigned to Judge Callahan's docket wasn't just bad luck. It felt like a targeted maneuver, a clear signal from the system's old guard, facilitated by Judge Peterson's hidden hand, that Malik Johnson's fight for justice would face not only the aggressive defense of the city and police, but also a steep uphill battle against judicial bias from the very outset. The deck had been deliberately stacked against them before the first legal argument was even made. The assignment of Judge Gloria Callahan cast a long shadow over Malik Johnson's nascent lawsuit. From the very first status conference, it became clear that the path forward would be fraught with judicial skepticism. Sarah Chen presented the ACLU's proposed discovery plan outlining the need for extensive NYPD data stop reports, disciplinary records and deposition schedules. Judge Callahan listened impatiently, tapping her pen, her expression radiating barely concealed annoyance. When the city's lead attorney objected, calling the requests overly broad, burdensome, and a fishing expedition, Judge Callahan readily agreed, significantly curtailing the scope of initial discovery. This set the tone for the grueling pre-trial phase. The city's law department immediately filed a comprehensive motion to dismiss the entire case, arguing on multiple fronts. They attacked Malik's standing, claiming his individual experiences couldn't possibly represent the diverse situations of thousands of students. They derided his data collection methodology, calling it unscientific teenagers' homework, unsuitable for federal court. They invoked qualified immunity with vigor, asserting that Lilty Harrison and the other officers were performing discretionary functions and their actions did not violate any clearly established constitutional rights of which a reasonable officer would have known. They argued vehemently that there was no evidence of an official policy or custom of discrimination making. The city and high-ranking NYPD officials, improper defendant Sarah Chen and the ACLU team, worked relentlessly preparing a massive opposition brief. They countered each point, arguing Malik's experience was emblematic, supported by numerous corroborating accounts. They submitted expert statistical analyses bolstering Malik's initial findings. They cited clear legal precedents where courts had denied qualified immunity in similar racial profiling contexts. They included dozens of sworn affidavits, painstakingly gathered from other Liberty High students and recent graduates, detailing similar encounters with Harrison's unit, painting a vivid picture of a pattern and practice. But presenting these arguments before Judge Callahan felt like pleading before a stone wall. She frequently interrupted Sarah Chen with sharp, skeptical questions while listening attentively, seemingly sympathetically to the city's arguments. Meanwhile, life outside the courtroom grew increasingly difficult. For Malik, the police harassment continued, though perhaps more subtly. Officers wouldn't necessarily stop him every day, but cruisers would appear consistently on his block idling. He'd notice officers watching him from parked cars near the school, entrance making notes. It was a constant low-level psychological warfare designed to keep him perpetually on edge. His attempts to gather further evidence were stymied. Friends who had previously shared stories became withdrawn. Fearful one classmate, who had initially agreed to sign an affidavit backing Malik's claims, tearfully told him his parents forbade it, after his older brother, also a Liberty High student, was suddenly arrested on a minor trumped-up charge that was later dropped. The message was clear. Associating with Malik's lawsuit carried risks. Witness intimidation wasn't always direct. Sometimes it was about creating a climate of fear that silenced potential corroboration. Malik felt the weight of it all, the legal battles, the intimidating police presence, the fear he saw in his friends' eyes. He struggled to focus on his schoolwork, his grades slipping slightly, just as the principal had implicitly warned. The pressure was immense. Then came Judge Callahan's ruling. On the motion to dismiss, she convened the parties in her courtroom. Her decision, delivered orally from the bench, was a carefully worded strategic blow. She denied the motion to dismiss, entirely stating that the plaintiffs had presented just enough evidence at this preliminary stage to allow the core claims against Lit Harrison and the precinct itself to proceed. This offered a sliver of hope, a reason for Malik and Sarah to feel a momentary sense of relief. But then came the caveats. Judge Callahan granted the motion to dismiss all claims against the police commissioner, the mayor and the city of New York, finding insufficient evidence presented at this stage to demonstrate a city-wide policy or deliberate indifference from top leadership. She also significantly narrowed the definition of the proposed class of students Malik could represent, limiting it temporally and perhaps geographically. This ruling effectively decapitated the lawsuit's potential for forcing broad systemic reform by shielding the highest levels of command. It weakened the case's overall impact, making it primarily about the actions of one lieutenant and one precinct rather than a reflection of potentially department-wide issues. It was a partial victory engineered to feel like a defeat, a classic judicial maneuver allowing the case to proceed while severely limiting its potential threat to the powers that be. It's tough seeing a strong case get chipped away by procedural rulings, isn't it? Let us know where you're watching from comment number 1. If you think qualified immunity often protects bad actors, and please hit like and subscribe if you want to follow Malik's uphill battle for justice against the odds. Callahan concluded the hearing briskly, leaving Sarah Chen and Malik absorbing the mixed outcome. They had survived dismissal barely, but their path forward was now significantly steeper facing a judge who had already signaled her skepticism and limited their ability to challenge the system at its highest levels. With their case significantly narrowed by Judge Callahan's ruling and facing a judiciary seemingly predisposed against them, how would Malik and the ACLU navigate the treacherous discovery phase against city lawyers determined to obstruct at every turn? And what new lows might the forces opposing Malik stoop to as they intensified their efforts to break his resolve, now focusing their pressure not just on him, but perhaps on the one thing even more vulnerable, his family? Judge Callahan's ruling narrowing the scope of the lawsuit was a setback, but not a knockout blow. Malik Johnson and Sarah Chen knew the core claim regarding the discriminatory practices of Luttie Harrison and the 48th Precinct remained viable, albeit harder to prove, without the explicit link to higher command. The case now entered the discovery phase, a period theoretically designed for mutual disclosure of evidence, but which Sarah warned Malik would likely become another battleground. Her prediction proved grimly accurate. The city's law department assigned a team of seasoned litigators who immediately employed every obstructionist tactic available: ACLU requests for stop-and-frisk data, internal guidelines on youth interactions. Disciplinary records for Harrison and his team were met with months-long delays, voluminous document dumps containing mostly irrelevant material and excessive redactions, citing every conceivable privilege, officer safety, ongoing investigations, personnel privacy, vague security concerns. When documents were finally produced, key sections were often blacked out, rendering them almost useless. Depositions proved equally contentious, Luttie Harrison flanked by city lawyers and a watchful police. Union attorney presented an image of unflappable arrogance. He answered Sarah Chen's pointed questions with curt denials, evasions, and practiced deflections. He claimed ignorance of any statistical disparities, attributed patterns to proactive policing in response to community complaints, and dismissed student accounts as exaggerated or unreliable. Officers Shaw and Miller, when deposed, echoed Harrison's narrative. Their stories perfectly aligned, suggesting extensive coaching. Malik's own deposition was a grueling ordeal, stretching over 2 full days. Arthur Thorne, perhaps retained now by the city, or the union specifically for his aggressive style, led the questioning. His approach was relentless. He probed into Malik's school records, his friendships, his social media activity, his family background, searching for any ammunition. He twisted Malik's words from his initial research, attempted to portray his data collection as biased and politically motivated. He repeatedly suggested Malik harbored a personal grudge against the police, was seeking fame, or was being manipulated by the ACLU. Thorne tried baiting him, trying to provoke an angry outburst he could later characterize as instability. Malik, drawing on Sarah's intensive preparation, fought to remain calm, focused, sticking to the facts, repeating his experiences clearly. But the relentless hours-long interrogation under hostile questioning left him emotionally drained and physically exhausted. Simultaneously, the anonymous online smear campaign intensified. New posts appeared on fringe websites and social media platforms fabricating details about Malik's life. They falsely claimed he had a sealed juvenile record for assault, hinted darkly at gang affiliations, posted selectively cropped photos designed to make him look menacing. The lies were blatant, easily disproven, if examined closely, but designed to poison the well to create negative associations in the public mind and perhaps even influence potential jurors. But the most cruel and calculated escalation came not through legal maneuvering or digital slander, but through direct pressure applied to Malik's family. His mother, Elena Johnson, a hard-working single parent employed as a cleaner at a downtown office building, suddenly found her job in jeopardy. Her supervisor, previously reasonable, became hypercritical, citing minor infractions, issuing written warnings. Her hours were cut without explanation. Anonymous complaints about her work ethic mysteriously appeared in her personnel file. The implication was clear, though unspoken: step out of line, and you lose your livelihood, adding immense financial stress to their already modest household. Then came the eviction notice, delivered by certified mail. It cited a minor technical violation of their apartment lease, a cracked window screen they had reported months ago, but the landlord had never fixed. The notice gave them 30 days to vacate, an impossibly short time frame in New York's tight housing market. The landlord, previously amicable, suddenly became unreachable. The timing immediately following the intensification of the lawsuit and the online attacks left no doubt in Malik's mind. This was retaliation. This was the consequence. Judge Peterson had warned about the powerful forces striking back, not just at him, but at his family, aiming for his most vulnerable point. Malik felt a wave of guilt and despair wash over him. Was his fight worth losing there? Home, his mother's job. Seeing her worry lines deepen each night, he confided in Sarah Chen, expressing his fears, his doubts, his consideration of maybe dropping the lawsuit to make it all stop. Sarah listened patiently, her expression filled with empathy but also resolve. "This is what they do, Malik," she said softly. "They attack your family, your livelihood, because they can't attack the facts. They want to break you. They want you to give up. The decision is always yours. But no, this dropping the case now means they win. It means they can silence anyone who dares to challenge them through fear and intimidation. It means the harassment of students near Liberty High continues unchecked." Malik looked at his mother that evening, saw the worry in her eyes but also the quiet pride, her unwavering belief in him despite the fear. He looked at the eviction notice, the documentation of the police stops, the hateful online comments. He thought of his friends still afraid to walk home. He knew Sarah was right. Retreat was not an option. The pressure tactics meant to break him instead forged a harder resolve, fueled now not just by principle, but by a burning anger at the injustice being inflicted upon his family. The discovery. Wars would continue, but the personal stakes had just become terrifyingly real. The weight of the pressure bearing down on his family threatened to suffocate Malik Johnson. He pictured their small apartment gone, his mother jobless, struggling, all because he dared to speak out. Doubt gnawed at him, a cold, insidious voice whispering that maybe Judge Peterson, maybe Principal Davies, maybe even Lut Garvey were right. Maybe he was just a kid stirring up trouble he couldn't handle. He confessed his fears to his mother, Elena, one evening, the eviction notice sitting heavy on their small kitchen table. Elena Johnson listened, her face etched with worry, but also with a fierce protective pride. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Malik," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "They want you to be scared. They want me to be scared. They want us to give up. That's how they keep control. But what you are doing, what you found out, it matters. It matters to you, to your friends, to this whole neighborhood. This fight is bigger than their threats. We didn't raise you to back down from doing what's right just because it's hard. We will figure out the apartment. We will figure out my job. We always do. You keep fighting." Her words, simple, resolute, became his anchor. In the following days, the strength his mother showed. Him seemed to ripple outwards. News of the eviction threat and Elena's job troubles spread quickly through their Bronx community, ignited perhaps by Malik's own tentative sharing with close friends or activist contacts. The response was immediate, and heartening local tenant organizers connected Elena with pro bono lawyers, who immediately challenged the flimsy eviction notice, citing its retaliatory nature. A pastor from their church discreetly started a support fund helping cover potential moving costs or lost wages. Neighbors offered words of encouragement, shared food, dropped off groceries. Small groups of parents and students held brief, peaceful vigils outside the 48th precinct, demanding an end to the harassment holding. Signs that read, "Support Malik Johnson" and "Stop profiling our kids." This grassroots solidarity was a powerful antidote to the isolation tactics. Malik felt a surge of renewed purpose, realizing his fight resonated deeply within his community, confirming it truly was bigger than just him. While the community rallied, Sarah Chen and the ACLU legal team pressed on with the grueling discovery process. Despite the city's stonewalling, they had one significant breakthrough, buried within thousands of pages of minimally relevant documents dumped on them. They found it an internal NYPD memorandum from 2 years prior, drafted by a mid-level commander. The memo explicitly discussed the high volume of citizen complaints regarding stops of young people near Liberty High, acknowledged community friction, and even mentioned potential litigation risks. However, after analyzing crime statistics, which the memo itself noted might be influenced by enforcement patterns, the commander concluded that the aggressive stop tactics were a necessary component of crime control in the area. The memo recommended only minor adjustments to reporting procedures and vague suggestions for community outreach, essentially green-lighting the continuation of the problematic practices. This document was dynamite. It directly contradicted the city's official position that there was no awareness of a specific problem near the school. It demonstrated knowledge and arguably deliberate indifference. At a command level, Sarah Chen immediately filed a motion to compel the production of all documents related to the memo's creation and distribution, and crucially argued for its admissibility as key evidence proving official policy or custom. The city's lawyers reacted with predictable fury. They filed lengthy briefs arguing the memo was protected by deliberative process privilege, attorney-client privilege, work, product doctrine, claiming it was irrelevant to Loti Harrison's specific actions and would unduly prejudice the court. The legal battle over this single document intensified, leading to another contentious hearing. Before Judge Gloria Callahan, Sarah Chen argued passionately that the memo was directly relevant, proving the city knew about the discriminatory impact of its practices and chose not to rectify them. The city's lawyers retorted that internal discussions exploring policy options should not be used against them, that it would chill frank internal debate. Judge Callahan listened, her expression impassive. She asked few clarifying questions. Then she issued her ruling from the bench. Motion to compel denied, motion to admit the memorandum denied. The court finds the document falls under deliberative process privilege. Its relevance to the specific actions alleged against Lieutenant Harrison is outweighed by its potential for prejudice and confusion of the issues. The ruling was a devastating blow delivered with cool judicial finality. It blocked the single best piece of evidence proving official awareness and tolerance of the discriminatory practices. It gutted a central pillar of the ACLU's strategy for establishing municipal liability and forcing systemic change. It felt less like a reasoned legal decision and more like an act of judicial protectionism shielding the city and the NYPD from accountability. It's infuriating when clear evidence gets blocked by legal technicalities, isn't it? Tell us where you're watching from. Comment number 1. If you think judges sometimes use privilege to protect powerful institutions, and please like and subscribe if you believe Malik's fight against these odds deserves to be seen. Callahan moved on to the next item on her docket, leaving Sarah Chen and Malik reeling from the setback. The path to proving a systemic pattern had just become exponentially harder, thanks to a judge seemingly determined to protect the status quo, with this crucial internal memo proving official knowledge, now ruled inadmissible by Judge Callahan. Malik, and the ACLU face an even tougher battle, demonstrating a widespread pattern of discrimination solely through statistics and individual testimonies. How can they possibly overcome this major evidentiary hurdle, especially when potential witnesses remain fearful? And recognizing the clear bias they face, what unexpected strategy might they or their opponents deploy as the trial itself finally looms closer? The denial of the motion to admit the internal NYPD memorandum was a body blow to the ACLU's case. Judge Callahan's ruling effectively severed the link between the street-level harassment experienced by Malik Johnson and his classmates and any demonstrable awareness or indifference at the higher levels of the NYPD. Sarah Chen knew this significantly weakened their ability to argue for broad systemic remedies, forcing them to rely almost entirely on proving a localized pattern and practice of discrimination, attributable specifically to Lieutenant Harrison and the officers under his command at the 48th Precinct. The trial began under Judge Callahan's icy gaze. The courtroom was packed, observers filling every available seat. Malik sat beside Sarah at the plaintiff's table, feeling a mixture of trepidation and resolve. Across the room, Lieutenant Harrison sat flanked by his city-appointed lawyers, looking confident, almost smug. Sarah Chen's opening statement acknowledged, "The challenge head on, Your Honor, opposing counsel." She began, her voice steady. "We will demonstrate through overwhelming statistical evidence and the courageous testimony of numerous students, including Mr. Johnson himself, that officers under the command of Lieutenant Harrison engaged in a persistent pattern of unconstitutional race-based stop searches and interrogations near Liberty High School, creating a hostile environment that violated the fundamental rights of these young people." The city's defense countered immediately. Their opening painted a picture of dedicated officers working diligently in a high-crime neighborhood, making difficult judgment calls based on experience, not bias. They dismissed the statistical evidence as flawed manipulation and characterized the student accounts as exaggerated anecdotes fueled by anti-police sentiment. The trial unfolded into a grueling, meticulous presentation of the ACLU's pattern evidence. First came the expert statistician, meticulously detailing the stark racial disparities in stop data attributable to Harrison's unit, compared to city-wide averages and other precincts controlling for various factors. The city's lawyers attacked the expert's methodology relentlessly, during cross-examination seeking to sow doubt about the data's validity. Then came the student witnesses, one after another, Malik included. They recounted their experiences being stopped, questioned, searched, often feeling humiliated and afraid. Sarah Chen guided them carefully, eliciting details that highlighted the lack of reasonable suspicion, the repetitive nature of the stops, the focus on minority students. But the defense cross-examinations were brutal. Lawyers picked apart minor inconsistencies. In recollections questioned their perceptions, implied they had attracted police attention through their own behavior. Judge Callahan frequently sustained defense objections, limiting testimony she deemed speculative or overly broad regarding the officer's motives, making it difficult for Sarah to fully convey the psychological impact or the systemic feel of the harassment. Lieutenant Harrison's testimony was a masterclass in defiant denial. He confidently asserted that all stops conducted by his officers were constitutionally sound based on observed behavior or reliable information. He attributed the racial disparities solely to crime patterns, not bias. He praised his officers' diligence, portraying himself as a dedicated commander. Upholding the law, Sarah Chen cross-examined him vigorously, pressing him on specific stop reports, lacking clear justification, highlighting the statistical anomalies under his command. But Harrison, aided by frequent objections from his counsel, which Judge Callahan often sustained, parried effectively, maintaining an air of professional confidence. As the trial progressed, a sense of pessimism began to creep into the ACLU team. Judge Callahan's rulings consistently seemed to favor the defense, limiting the scope of their evidence while giving broad latitude to the city's lawyers. The statistical evidence was compelling but abstract. The student testimonies were moving but vulnerable to attack. Harrison remained an unshakable wall of denial. It felt as though the path to victory was narrowing, perhaps disappearing entirely. Then, during a brief trial recess, Sarah Chen received an unexpected, urgent encrypted email. The sender identified himself as Miguel Diaz, a former NYPD officer, who had served at the 48th Precinct, directly under Lieutenant Harrison, until resigning several months prior. Diaz wrote that he had been following the trial coverage with increasing dismay. He stated Harrison's testimony was perjurious, and that he, Diaz, possessed first-hand knowledge and evidence of explicit directives from Harrison, encouraging the targeting of minority youth near Liberty High, and instructions on how to phrase reports to circumvent constitutional scrutiny. He expressed disgust at the department's internal culture and a willingness to testify truthfully. Despite the immense personal and professional risks involved, Sarah read the email, her heart suddenly pounding with renewed hope. A whistleblower and insider willing to break the blue wall of silence. This could change everything. She immediately initiated secure protocols to verify Diaz's identity and assess his credibility. The initial vetting suggested he was legitimate, a former officer, with a clean record who left the force citing disillusionment. His potential testimony directly corroborating the alleged pattern and contradicting Harrison under oath could be the bombshell they needed to overcome Judge Callahan's skepticism and the city's stonewalling. The possibility was electrifying, a lifeline thrown to their seemingly foundering case, but bringing Diaz forward carried enormous risks. Would Judge Callahan even allow his testimony this late in the trial? Would the defense succeed in destroying his credibility? Could they ensure his safety? The decision weighed heavily, but the potential reward, the chance to expose the truth from the inside, was too significant to ignore. They had to try. A new phase of the battle was about to begin, ignited by the unexpected courage of one former officer willing to speak out. The emergence of former NYPD officer Miguel Diaz sent ripples of frantic energy through the city's legal team. Sarah Chen immediately notified Judge Callahan and opposing counsel Arthur Thorne of their intent to call Diaz as a rebuttal witness. Thorne erupted in furious objections. He argued vehemently against allowing the testimony, claiming unfair surprise prejudice, lack of proper disclosure during discovery, and asserting Diaz was likely a disgruntled, unreliable witness seeking revenge. Sarah Chen countered forcefully, citing the rules allowing rebuttal testimony to directly contradict evidence or testimony presented by the defense, specifically Lilty Harrison's denials under oath. She argued Diaz came forward only after hearing Harrison's testimony, making prior disclosure impossible, and that his first-hand account was directly relevant to the core issue of a pattern and practice. Judge Callahan, clearly displeased by this unexpected development, listened impatiently. After a tense sidebar conference filled with heated legal arguments, she reluctantly ruled that Diaz could testify, but strictly limited the scope to direct rebuttal of Harrison's claims. A narrow window Sarah intended to exploit, fully Miguel Diaz took the stand the following day. The courtroom was packed tighter than ever, reporters spilling into the aisles. The atmosphere was electric. Lieutenant Harrison stared daggers at his former subordinate. Thorne looked poised to pounce. Diaz, visibly nervous but resolute, swore the oath. Guided by Sarah Chen's careful questioning, he began his testimony. His voice steady despite the pressure. He described his time serving under Lieutenant Harrison at the 48th Precinct. He spoke of specific roll call briefings, where Harrison emphasized increasing stop numbers, particularly targeting young men of color near Liberty High, using coded language like "clear the corners" or "engage the usual suspects." He recounted instances where reasonable suspicion was clearly lacking, yet stops were made under Harrison's directive. He detailed the pressure officers felt to meet informal quotas, fearing negative evaluations or undesirable assignments if their stop numbers were low. He described being implicitly and sometimes explicitly coached on how to write stop reports using boilerplate language about furtive movements or proximity to high-crime areas to justify questionable detentions. He specifically recalled incidents where he witnessed Harrison himself alter junior officers' reports to strengthen weak justifications or omit potentially problematic details. His testimony painted a damning picture of a precinct culture under Harrison that encouraged tolerated and actively covered up discriminatory policing. Arthur Thorne's cross-examination was savage. He attacked Diaz from every angle. "You were reprimanded for tardiness twice, weren't you?" "Officer Diaz, isn't it true you requested a transfer out of the 48th Precinct and were denied?" "Didn't. You have personal disagreements with Lieutenant Harrison over assignments. You claim you resigned due to disillusionment. Isn't it more accurate you left before facing further disciplinary action?" Thorne hammered away, trying to portray Diaz as incompetent, biased, vengeful, a disgruntled employee fabricating stories. But Diaz held his ground. He calmly admitted to minor past reprimands, unrelated to integrity, denied personal animosity, reiterated his ethical concerns as the reason for leaving. He refused to be rattled by Thorne's aggressive tactics, sticking firmly to his account of Harrison's directives and the precinct's practices. Judge Callahan watched impassively, occasionally sustaining Thorne's more outrageous objections, but largely letting the brutal cross-examination proceed. The media coverage exploded. "Whistleblower cop accuses NYPD lieutenant of ordering racial profiling" ran the headlines. News channels featured Diaz's testimony prominently. The mayor and police commissioner faced renewed intense pressure to address the allegations coming now not just from a teenage plaintiff, but from one of their own former officers. The NYPD's carefully constructed defense seemed to be crumbling. Then came the moment that shifted the trial irrevocably. Thorne, attempting a final devastating blow, leaned towards Diaz, his voice dripping with scorn. "So, Officer Diaz, after all these serious allegations, after supposedly witnessing years of misconduct, you expect this court to believe you based solely on your word, your convenient memory, your alleged disillusionment. Where is your proof? Where is one shred of concrete evidence to back up these extraordinary self-serving claims?" Diaz met Thorne's glare. He turned calmly towards Judge Callahan. "Your Honor, may I have permission to present documentary evidence that directly corroborates my testimony regarding Lieutenant Harrison's directives and the alteration of official reports?" Thorne immediately objected. "Relevance foundation. Improper rebuttal scope." Judge Callahan hesitated, looking annoyed, but Sarah Chen argued forcefully. "Your Honor, the defense has directly attacked this witness's credibility and accused him of fabrication. This evidence directly rebuts those attacks and speaks to Lieutenant Harrison's veracity under oath." Reluctantly, Callahan agreed to review the proffered evidence outside the jury's presence, if applicable or during a brief recess. Diaz produced a small, unassuming flash drive from it. His lawyer projected onto the courtroom screens copies of documents Diaz had discreetly saved before resigning. There were several emails sent from Harrison's official account to his unit containing thinly veiled instructions, using phrases like "need to increase activity in the usual spots near Liberty." This shift numbers a low focus on the profiles discussed, or reminding officers how to properly articulate reasonable suspicion using approved language. Then came the most damning evidence draft copies of 2 incident reports Diaz himself had written, detailing stops where suspicion was minimal, compared side by side with the final official versions bearing Harrison's signature. The final versions contained added phrases, inserted descriptions of furtive movements or evasive behavior that were entirely absent from Diaz's original drafts, proving direct falsification. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Harrison visibly paled, gripping the edge of the defense table. Thorne stood momentarily speechless, his aggressive posture deflated, the concrete evidence corroborating the whistleblower's testimony, contradicting Harrison's sworn denials, had just landed like a bombshell, obliterating the NYPD's defense and potentially exposing Lieutenant Harrison to charges of perjury. The trial had reached its dramatic, unpredictable turning point. Officer Miguel Diaz's presentation of the incriminating emails and altered reports sent shockwaves through Judge Callahan's courtroom. Arthur Thorne's aggressive cross-examination faltered. Lieutenant Harrison sat stone-faced, his earlier arrogance visibly shattered. The tangible proof of report falsification and directives, hinting strongly at biased intent, fundamentally shifted the narrative. The city's lawyers immediately requested a recess, huddling frantically with Harrison and likely making panicked calls back to the law department and NYPD command. When court resumed, the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The defense's case predicated on Harrison's denials and dismissal of student accounts was now in tatters. Harrison faced not only likely liability in the civil suit, but potential perjury charges. The media frenzy outside the courtroom reached fever pitch, fueled by the concrete evidence of official misconduct. Recognizing their position was dire, the city's legal team abruptly changed tactics. Their primary goal shifted from outright victory to damage control. Limiting the public relations disaster containing the legal fallout, preventing a potentially sweeping court-ordered reform mandate, became paramount. They initiated urgent settlement discussions with Sarah Chen and the ACLU legal team. Their initial offers were substantial, financially proposing significant monetary damages for Malik Johnson as lead plaintiff and establishing a sizable settlement fund for other potential class members. They readily conceded that Lieutenant Harrison would face severe disciplinary action, likely termination. But on the crucial issue of systemic reform, their proposals remained vague, non-committal. They offered promises of reviewing training protocols, enhancing community outreach initiatives, forming advisory committees, standard bureaucratic responses, lacking teeth or independent oversight. Sarah Chen meticulously relayed these offers to Malik and representatives from the student community groups that had rallied around him. The financial figures were life-changing for many, including Malik's family, who had faced eviction threats and employment insecurity. The prospect of seeing Harrison fired provided a sense of immediate accountability. Pressure mounted from various quarters. Some community leaders, exhausted by the long fight, urged them to take the deal, secure the financial relief, and declare victory. The city administration, through back channels, signaled its strong preference for a swift resolution, avoiding the continued embarrassment and cost of a trial. Even Judge Callahan, during brief status conferences, made subtle remarks about the benefits of settlement, the uncertainties of litigation, hinting that pushing for overly broad remedies might not be fruitful. Hidden from view, Judge Arthur Peterson also likely exerted influence. He contacted his allies within City Hall and the law department, strongly advising them to offer generous financial terms to make the lawsuit disappear quickly. He feared a trial verdict that not only validated Malik's claims, but potentially referenced the initial Youth Law Day incident or led to further investigations that could expose his own questionable conduct or connections. A quick settlement, even an expensive one, was preferable to prolonged scrutiny. Malik found himself at a crossroads. The settlement offered personal vindication, financial security for his family, and the certainty of Harrison's downfall. It was tempting, incredibly so. After months of harassment, threats, pressure, and legal battles, the offer felt like an escape hatch, a chance to return to some semblance of normal teenage life. But then he thought about Officer Diaz, risking his career and safety to reveal the truth. He thought about his friends still being stopped near school. He thought about his mother's quiet, unwavering support. He thought about his own words during the ACLU press conference. "This isn't just about me." He met with Sarah Chen, his expression resolute. "Sarah," he began, "I appreciate the city's offer. I understand why some people want us to take it. It's a lot of money. Harrison gets fired. We win, right?" But he paused, looking directly at her. "That wasn't the only reason we started this. It wasn't just about getting Harrison. It was about stopping this from happening to anyone else. If we take this deal without guaranteed changes to how they police near schools without real oversight, doesn't that just mean they find a new Harrison? They just find new ways to do the same thing. What did Officer Diaz risk everything for if the system itself doesn't change?" He spoke passionately, recalling the fear, the humiliation, the feeling of being powerless. He argued that accepting the settlement without enforceable systemic reforms would be a hollow victory, betraying the core principle that drove the lawsuit from the beginning. "We have the evidence. Sarah, we have the momentum. They are scared. We can't back down now. Not when real change feels possible. We need specific policy changes. Court-ordered independent monitoring, transparent data reporting. Anything less feels like we are just taking blood money and letting the problem continue." His words, filled with conviction born from hard-won experience, resonated powerfully. Sarah Chen, who had perhaps felt the institutional pressure to consider the settlement herself, saw the unwavering Commitment in his eyes, Malik, she said after a moment. You are absolutely right. This fight was always about more than damages. It was about changing the system. We stand with you. We reject the current offer and demand meaningful, enforceable reforms. We proceed to trial if necessary. His decision, bold, defiant, potentially risky, closed the door on an easy resolution. It ensured the fight would continue, forcing a confrontation, not just over past wrongs, but over the future of policing in their community. It was the stand of a young man who, having found his voice, refused to have it silenced by compromise, setting the stage for the final judgment and whatever unexpected consequences might follow. Malik Johnson's refusal to accept a settlement without meaningful systemic reforms forced the trial to its conclusion. The city's lawyers, clearly rattled by Officer Diaz's corroborated testimony and the undeniable evidence of report falsification, attempted damage control in their closing arguments. They conceded Lieutenant Harrison may have shown poor judgment in isolated incidents, perhaps even perjured himself under pressure, but vehemently denied any official policy or custom of discrimination. They urged the court to focus narrowly on Harrison's actions, not indict the entire NYPD. Sarah Chen, in her closing, delivered a powerful summation. She meticulously connected the dots, the statistical disparities, the consistent student testimonies. Harrison's denials proven false by Diaz's emails and draft reports, arguing that this was not isolated misconduct, but a clear pattern sanctioned or deliberately ignored by precinct command. She implored Judge Callahan to look beyond individual remedies and impose meaningful court-supervised reforms to protect the constitutional rights of thousands of students. After brief deliberation, given the weight of evidence, particularly Diaz's bombshells, Judge Callahan delivered her verdict. From the bench, she found Lieutenant Harrison and the City of New York liable, finding that the plaintiffs had successfully demonstrated a pattern and practice of unconstitutional race-based stops and searches conducted by officers under Harrison's command near Liberty High School. She awarded significant compensatory damages to Malik Johnson and established a process for other affected students within the certified class to file claims. It was a clear legal victory, a vindication of Malik's research, his courage, and the experiences of countless students. However, when it came to the crucial issue of injunctive relief, the remedy phase, Judge Callahan's inherent biases resurfaced while ordering the NYPD to revise its training protocols on youth interactions and implicit bias, and to enhance its data collection on stops near schools. The specific mandates lacked teeth. She declined to appoint an independent monitor, rejected the ACLU's proposals for strict numerical limits or heightened justification standards for stops near schools, and allowed the NYPD significant leeway in implementing the required changes. It was a remedy designed more for appearance than for deep structural change, leaving loopholes that concerned. Sarah Chen and Malik would allow similar practices to continue under different guises. The legal victory felt strangely incomplete, a significant battle won, but the war for lasting systemic change remained frustratingly elusive. Months after the trial, however, the ripples from Officer Diaz's courageous testimony continued to spread. The evidence he provided not only doomed Harrison, but sparked intense internal investigations within the NYPD and attracted scrutiny from federal authorities, looking into patterns of misconduct and perjury. Investigators digging into Harrison's connections and the 48th Precinct's history began examining tangential communications, financial records, and historical case files, seeking corroboration for Diaz's broader claims about precinct culture and potential cover-ups. This wider net inadvertently ensnared an unexpected figure, Judge Arthur Peterson. The investigation uncovered encrypted emails and testimony from other sources suggesting Peterson's unusually hostile reaction during the initial Youth Law Day presentation and his later behind-the-scenes advocacy for a quick, weak settlement weren't solely motivated by judicial temperament or embarrassment. It transpired that Peterson had long maintained close off-the-record relationships with certain high-ranking police union officials, including figures implicated in shielding officers like Harrison from accountability. There were suggestions of past favors exchanged, potentially Related to judicial assignments or rulings in unrelated cases, Peterson apparently recognized immediately that Malik's meticulously researched presentation, backed by the ACLU, posed a genuine threat not just to Harrison, but potentially to the entire network of favors and influence. He benefited from his attempt to shut Malik down early, and later to push for a quiet settlement, were acts of self-preservation aimed at preventing broader scrutiny that might expose his own questionable connections or past judicial actions. Faced with potential exposure through the widening federal probe, Judge Arthur Peterson abruptly announced his retirement, citing health reasons. The timing and lack of fanfare strongly suggested he was stepping down under pressure, avoiding a formal judicial ethics investigation or potential impeachment. Malik Johnson learned of Peterson's resignation with a sense of stunned disbelief. His journey had begun with a biased judge mocking his presentation. Now that same judge's career had ended indirectly. Because of the very case he tried to quash, Malik had won his lawsuit. He had exposed a corrupt lieutenant. He had received compensation and forced limited reforms. But the most unexpected consequence, the true twist, was the downfall of a compromised judge, triggered by a 17-year-old's determination to speak truth to power. He realized the fight for justice operated in complex, interconnected ways, and that challenging injustice, even on a seemingly small scale, could have profound, unforeseen consequences. As he prepared for college, hoping eventually for law school, Malik felt not naive optimism, but a clear-eyed understanding of the challenges ahead. The victory was real, but the system's capacity for resistance and corruption remained formidable. His experience hadn't just given him a case, it had given him a calling. The battle continued, and he was ready for the next chapter. Malik Johnson's journey powerfully illustrates that courage and truth can emerge from unexpected places, challenging entrenched power structures often blinded by prejudice. His story begins with the stark reality of bias, showing how easily assumptions, based on race and age, can lead figures in authority like Judge Peterson to dismiss valid concerns and disrespect individuals. It's a potent reminder that systemic issues like racial profiling are not abstract concepts, but lived realities impacting young people daily, and that their voices and experiences deserve serious attention, not mockery. The narrative underscores the critical importance of allies and institutional support, like that provided by the ACLU, in amplifying marginalized voices and navigating complex legal systems. Malik's meticulous research gained legitimacy and force through this partnership, demonstrating that individual initiative combined with organizational resources can mount formidable challenges against powerful opponents like the NYPD and city bureaucracy. However, the story also realistically portrays the immense resources and often unethical tactics deployed by those resisting accountability, from bureaucratic stonewalling and character assassination attempts to direct intimidation targeting, not just the plaintiff, but also their family and potential witnesses. Furthermore, Malik's experience highlights the limitations and potential biases within the judicial system itself. Judge Callahan's rulings, while adhering to a veneer of legal procedure, demonstrably hindered the pursuit of broader systemic reform, showcasing how judicial discretion can be influenced by personal leanings or deference to established power. Yet, the unexpected emergence of Officer Diaz, the whistleblower, underscores the vital role individual conscience can play in breaking through institutional silence, even at great personal risk. The final twist involving Judge Peterson reveals another layer, that corruption or complicity can exist even at the highest levels, and that challenging one injustice can sometimes inadvertently expose another, demonstrating the interconnectedness of power and accountability. Ultimately, Malik's story is one of resilience, showing that even partial victories can have far-reaching, unforeseen consequences, and that the fight for systemic change, while arduous, is fueled by the unwavering commitment of individuals willing to speak truth to power. Malik Johnson's determination to fight for his community, even as a teenager facing down powerful institutions, is truly inspiring. Were you shocked by Judge Peterson's initial dismissal, and even more so by the final revelation about his potential motives? What did you think of Officer Diaz risking his career to come forward as a whistleblower? Comment number 1 below if you believe whistleblowers are essential for accountability. We'd love to hear what lesson you personally took away from Malik's journey. If you believe in empowering young voices and supporting the fight against injustice, please show your appreciation by hitting that like button. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss more compelling stories about courage, systemic challenges, and the pursuit of truth. Sharing this story can also help inspire others to speak up. Thank you for following Malik's incredible fight. Keep believing in the power of evidence and the importance of every voice.